Professor Miller, thank you very much for accepting to talk to us, to the Habits program on digital identity and the use of smartphone and their applications. Thank you.
I'm very happy to be with you today.
Thank you. So let's go straight into our topic. You, some people call you the founder of the Anthropology of Consumption. My intro would be related to your keen interest in the relationship of humans with their things, or with things, with stuff. And ever since you have started, ever since you went to archaeological sites or you did your ethnography studies in the world, you have been always interested in the relationship of humans with things. Why is this important, the relationship of humans with things?
Because it is impossible to imagine being human outside of that relationship. It's actually our interaction with things that I think makes us human. Whether we are producing our food, whether we are creating our homes, whether we are clothing ourselves, these are absolutely fundamental to who and what we are. And if you think of anthropology as the study of cultural differences, then those cultural differences are primarily expressed in the external world that we create or we consume. So I don't see this as separated from the understanding of human beings. I think it is actually fundamental to the essential anthropological project of working out what a human being is.
So then the relationship of humans with their smartphones is just another type of relationship of humans with things, right? So
yes, I very much think so. I mean, I think one of the problems in the early discussion of the digital and smartphones was that people said, oh, it's a virtual world or a different world. And I never accepted that. As far as I'm concerned, if you go online, you see people creating aesthetic forms, like websites, etc. I mean, these are things that we are creating, new social media, etc., etc. It's an extension of the material external world that we have always produced. And I think, therefore, all the previous work that we did in trying to understand that relationship to things should now be extended. And the reason that is simple. More and more of the world is digital. We have to accept that, and therefore we can't just ignore it. We have to try and actually bring it within these material culture studies.
So you, in fact, you have developed the science, the branch of anthropology, of digital anthropology, and to that extent, I would ask you a simplistic question: what is digital?
Well, we have a center actually here for digital anthropology, and I'm just one part of it. And that's an important part of the answer, because the digital is actually anything that can be reduced to bits, to the on-off, as it were, and then the coding that follows of that and the creation of things that follow from that. And the fact that that reduction down to bits makes things much more easily replicable and shared. So it facilitates so many things we can do. But the reason I put it in that way is because a lot of what is going on in the digital is not the stuff we think of as digital. It's basically infrastructural. It's actually going on in the creation of, from factories to how money circulates around the world, to all sorts of things we don't even see. And so there are other people in the center where I work, they will be working more on those kind of infrastructural sides of what the digital is, but they are a huge component of the digital. Now, when people look at me and ask about my work on the digital, they're thinking much more about the online, about the things that actually digital communications and the digital in visual and those kind of areas of social life in particular, which are not infrastructural, right? So, and that is right, because that is actually the work I do. I mean, I had the 5-year project on social media and then the 5-year project on smartphones. So it's actually only one component of what the digital is, but because it's part of our everyday life, then for me as an anthropologist, it's perhaps the most important.
Yeah. So at this point of our discussion, it sounds logic to ask you, so right now, because you are into studying this digital world, as you call it, what is it that you're working on with your team? So what are you doing right now?
Well, as I said, there were two basic projects, but in the way the point was similar for both of them, which was really to understand the impact, the use and the consequence of technologies such as a smartphone globally. In other words, you tend to get a lot of people saying, oh, the smartphone is doing this or social media is doing that, but they tend to be thinking about maybe people in Bucharest or London or whatever. So I have to know, I'm an anthropologist, I have to know, well, the thing you just said about what it's doing, is that also true for factory workers in China? Is that also true for farmers in India? Who are we talking about when we make these claims? So to answer that, you needed global studies and comparative studies. So what we have is, for example, in my current project, we have 12 people working build sites in 10 countries around the world, so we can compare what is happening in Brazil and what is happening in China and what is happening in Italy, etc. And that allows us to be much more careful about the claims that we make. So we say, oh, the smartphone is doing this for that population, but it's doing something different for this population. But that is the world. Claims that don't take into account the global are not really true claims. You asked me about the human impact. Well, humanity is all of those people. So our purpose was really to try and use anthropology to make people appreciate that they also need to think about this. And actually, the two examples I just gave, factory workers in China, farmers in India, are huge users of smartphones. The smartphone is now basically a global object, and certainly in China, it's perhaps even more part of everyday life than it would be in Romania or in England. So it's really important to actually to acknowledge that kind of global ubiquity of the smartphone.
Now, listening to you, this is a question that came to my mind while listening to your answer just now. So it means that if we take into consideration all the elements of this of the smartphone, so the memes, the anonymity internet allows us, the selfies, even the fakes, and the fact that you said it's not the same for every culture or for every part of the world. Does this mean that we are assisting at a new digital languages? So are we going into that direction?
Yes, I think that we actually, people often think of these new technologies as narrowing us down, as making us more like each other. But you have to think the opposite can also be true, that we can be creating many more digital. A few years ago, you wouldn't have thought of whole societies of young men just based around gaming, and their world is the gaming world, etc. It didn't exist before. Right. You wouldn't have hired people who spend so much of their time maybe on social media, and sometimes they are different people there. They were shy in their offline life, and on online suddenly a new personality arises, and they do all these things they wouldn't do face to face. So I think that this is very much like all culture. It's an expansion. The world has just got a lot bigger. So the point I'm making about needing to understand the variety is even more important, because yes, we don't just have to understand Brazilians and Chinese. We now have to understand gaming people, social media people, the people who love to do the jokes, etc., and all the other people who do things that would have been done only online, but instead of building real houses, they do it on Minecraft. If they're young kids. These are other worlds, but they are worlds. They are worlds we live in and use. And learning how people create houses on Minecraft is different from learning how they build them with bricks and mortar. So this is a challenge, but I think this is something we accept. The world just got bigger, and we have to grow with it.
So the objective of your study in the end is once you have. That's a very innovative theory to look at that, because you're very right. People think to equalize, so it's smartphone overall. It's not, as you're saying. So what would be the concrete usage of these cultural understandings or differences in using the smartphone?
Okay, so you have to understand, I mean, obviously there are some things that are more general and some things that are more particular. So I could say to you, okay, I can give you, and we have many, many conclusions, but just to give you one example, you could say that as a result of this new media, communication, human communication has changed. Because until this, human communication was either oral, we are speaking to each other, or it is textual, we could email each other. But now it has also become visual, that actually you can use something like Snapchat. And I know people using Snapchat, and there is no words, no conversation. They are just showing maybe often images of their face, you know, looking happy or sad or whatever it is, or other kinds of visual images. And they are actually having a conversation that is visual. Actually, that becomes important. Now, that's a general claim, right?
Yeah.
The visual is now a possible mode of communication. But the implications of that will vary from place to place to place. So we are working in Japan. Now, Japan has a long tradition of using the visual because, you know, you think of manga and animations, but it's also a very formal society where people have a lot of etiquette about how they talk. So there you might find that people are finding ways to express emotion or often care. We look at the way young people are caring for older people, but often using stickers and other kinds of images that you know, we wouldn't even associate with older people, but they are using them there because it helps them get round the formal etiquette of ordinary conversation. So that's one way. But then if you look at something like how do people post the visual of themselves, okay? We were exploring a case of how do people look on Facebook when they become mothers? And in the English case, if you look, you find that the mothers, very quickly, they are absent. They replace themselves with images of their children, of the infant, new baby. Sure. And often for a long period of time, even the profile picture of them is actually the baby. And that continues for a long time. Whereas what happens when somebody becomes a mother in Trinidad? They post images of themselves that look super glamorous and sexy and cool, because they are saying, do not think that just because I'm a mother, I am any less those things. So the generalization is that the visual has become a more important element in conversation. But how people use that varies completely from place to place to place.
Oh, fantastic. This gives me a lot of hope. It means what you're saying, that humans are really using smartphone as a tool and not the other way around. To your earlier point, to express their cultural identity and needs and so on. So I'm even going to skip the question of, am I my phone? I'm going to skip that one.
Well, no, I think it's worth expressing because I don't think there's ever been an object as intimate as smartphones in history. I mean, the fact that in the whole of history, there was never anything so intimate, because when you get a smartphone, that's just the beginning. You delete things, you add things, you change content, you change settings, and you transform it. And the transformation is often making it something that is more like we think of as an avatar, something that is actually can be very, very personally expressive. So in our work, we have somebody who's like a very professional person. And if you look at their iPhone, it's incredibly organized, you know, it's the most professional they've ever been. You can see in this 600-page kind of life manual that is in their phone. And you get another person who is very like pragmatic and you know, and no, he doesn't want all this kind of, he only wants exactly what you require. So the personality, of course, expresses the culture. So the culture and then the individual personality in turn become expressed through the smartphone in a way I don't think anything did this quite like that Yeah, it's so completely. So I think it is a very important, intimate relationship with people, actually.
Your Japan example triggers the question then, and also this identity, this intimacy that the phone provides like no other object in our history. Triggers the question, so given all these instruments that we can use, the emojis, the Snapchats, the images, are feelings going to change or die? I mean, people are hiding. It's almost like a shield, right? Some people are not very, or many people are not happy to express their own opinions and feelings, and therefore they're using these kinds of instruments. So it's logic to ask whether feelings are disappearing.
No, I think the Japanese case would say the opposite. It is the non-digital where people are afraid. And the problem is we often think that what was before the digital was natural, and this is less natural.
Yes.
Actually, for anthropologists, there never was a natural. Everything we do is always within the etiquette, the appropriate behavior. So the way we talk has many constraints. We are never just saying everything we think. We will offend people. They will be upset. We will say that we don't know how to behave. Actually, it is ordinary talk that is very constrained. And usually, I mean, English people are terrible expressing emotions. To get an English person even to say they love you to another English person, they have to be drunk half the time. I mean,
Which is why the consumption of alcohol is high.
Exactly. So basically, there are many societies which have real struggle to express emotions. And that had nothing to do with the digital. It was because convention, tradition, the things that existed before the digital were very tightly constrained by cultural rules. So when the digital comes along, it can do either way. The Japanese example was that they are sometimes able to express themselves more clearly. We have Chinese people who say, if only I could say to you, really, what I can say to you through the phone.
Indeed.
I mean, actually, who've said that? Because on the phone, I can be funny. And, we found this in grandparent to grandchildren motions. The grandchildren were so surprised because they'd only ever met their grandparents in very formal ways. And suddenly the grandparents are sending them jokes and images and all of these things. And they said, I never knew my grandparents could be like that. So no, actually, there are many cases where it's much easier to show emotion, much easier to show feelings through the digital, but other places where the opposite will be true. Mm-hmm. And this is one of the problems, that we want to say it's good or we want to say it's bad. Almost everything I can say about the smartphone is that it will be equally or simultaneously good and bad in its consequences. There's almost nothing that is just good and nothing bad. It does both.
So on the good side, I mean, we see the smartphones being very helpful in a lot of domains. If I think of my mom who does not live with me, the fact that we can see each other every day, it's a tremendous achievement. And she has made the effort as a digital immigrant she is to learn these instruments so that we can talk. And in the same time, I think so not only socially in lots of domains, in payments, but there's one big element, because the world is not getting younger, or at least the big population in Western Hemisphere is not getting younger statistically. So there's a big population aging. The use of smartphone in healthcare, that's a big theme, and I don't think we're even at the beginning of understanding the possibilities. So can you are preoccupied by smart aging, by also the implications of using smartphones in healthcare. Would you like to expand on this one?
Yes, I think there's two sides. There's, if you like, the production side and the consumption side. Now, with regard to older people, it's quite extreme in a way, because a lot of older people weren't used to using these digital devices, and they find them very intimidating, and they causes a lot of anxiety. And the problem is, you'll have governments who will say to older people, oh, these new digital, they're very bad, they're addictive, they you know, they make people more selfish or lose things, etc. But they put all the forms online. So you can't do anything unless you're online.
Yes.
So they're doing the two opposite things. They're like saying don't use it, but they're making you use it. So obviously for older people, this is a very serious problem. And there is a lot of digital exclusion. Older people who find, you know, they can't fill out the form. And now when they try and phone up instead, it's 2 hours before anybody answers the phone. So, and I think that, you know, it does cause real struggles and real problems. And in my team, most of us also spent some of our field work teaching smartphone to elderly people, so we could really understand the struggle, the problems. And there were many, many problems. The smartphone is not an intuitive, easy to learn device at all. Even the terms, you know, they say press it, and then they press it, and then they say, oh, no, we meant a short press, not a long press. Or they say down, find under and down, or they say, or get a banking app, and then they say it's supposed to come from something called Google Play. Like, why would banking be on the Play? You know, there are so many things that are actually it's not intuitive, it's very confusing and very difficult.
And whose job is it? Because there are many older people. I mean, it's not a marginal problem.
No, I think this is actually a problem that the state, because the state is part of the problem. If it does everything online and excludes people, it should also take much more responsibility, really, for helping people in actually overcoming this. But that's what happens if you can't use it. But then when I'm dealing with older people who do get to learn to use it, then the opposite is true. Suddenly they say, oh, I can listen to music of the 70s in my 70s through Spotify.
Yes.
I have 70-year-olds, they're going back on dating apps. We have one in my field site called Plenty of Fish. I mean, there's suddenly, or they want to organize and see their friends, or if they're getting more immobile, it's harder for them to take a bus, then they can simply WhatsApp, etc., etc. So for the consumption side, there is the struggle and the exclusion, but then also the possibilities of exclusion and new capacities, as in when your elderly mother is in a different place, you can keep in contact. So what about from the production side? So what what our team has been doing is trying to find ways to make our research useful in the health sector. And because we don't have a lot of time, I'll just give you the main conclusion.
Yes.
Which is that the problem is they're producing all these mHealth apps, and most people don't like them and don't use them. So what we are doing is we are saying, actually, what the health services need to do is to look at the things that people do use, like WhatsApp, like Googling, the very basic things that people are familiar with, and show how these can be used for health purposes. So on my website, we have a 140-page manual on using WhatsApp for health, because we think that actually, if you're interested in health, you need to start using the things that people are comfortable with, familiar with, and will use. And at the moment, the health services and education services and governments, they just want to create all these new apps, okay, that are fantastic and etc. But really, that is not, I mean, it will help in certain circumstances. But I think because our project comes from the ground, because it comes from people, we see it from the perspective of people. So as anthropologists, I think we can help. We can say, no, this is do it from the bottom up, do it from what people like to use, and you will be much more successful in terms of integrating health and the population itself.
Oh, so in reality, this manual should be something that, if we take it further, it should be part of an educational effort of the states to really help elder people to use it. No, I mean to use
not just older people, everybody.
Everybody. Sorry. Yes.
And the other thing is, it will save the state a lot of money. Instead of producing all these new things, they're actually using something that basically everybody uses for very little money.
I would like to ask you, young people now. So we talked about elder people and their needs, and then the relationship with healthcare. Young people, smartphone usage does compete with sleep. it does. I mean, we can say it doesn't, but we know it does, I think, for all. It's a problem for young kids. Do you think some sort of usage regulation should interfere? Is this a topic or not at all?
Yes, it is. If you look over the last several decades, the parents have become very anxious about the children, for example, playing outside, at least in places like England and the US. Even though crime has actually gone down, they act as though crime level has really gone up. So they say, oh, it's not safe to do this and you can't go out to that. And they try and protect their children a lot. And then they find the children are spending more time online because they want to continue playing with their friends, etc. So, and being with their friends, and they're more restricted. So one of the reasons that the children are so orientated to the online is actually because the parents have forced them to be. And this is something that actually the parents do not realize, that they are part of the cause of this problem, but they are.
I absolutely agree.
And I think that actually they have to, like any kind of parenting, it is about a balance, because you want to support your child, but you can't stop them at 3 o'clock in the morning being very anxious about what somebody is saying about them and having their smartphone under the pillow. So I suppose now I speak more as a parent than as an academic. I tend to take a quite liberal, but not extremely liberal position. That is to say, I do have boundaries, which I keep to, but I think within those, I find it was valuable to have a reasonably liberal and not over-controlling relationship to this. In other words, to a degree, you have to trust your kids, but you also have to have boundaries, which they have to know that they can't. And I think that's why having just 1 or 2 clear restrictions is probably much better than having a whole lot.
Yes.
So, if the kids look at a few things you wish they weren't looking at, okay, it's not terrible, But on the other hand, if you think this is becoming something that they will actually suffer from or cause real damage in the long term, then yes, one does need to have restrictions. And of course, it depends on what age we're talking about.
Yes.
Because it's very different from a 7-year-old from a 17-year-old. So again, the problem with scholarship is scholarship makes you be particular. Which age are we talking about? Which society are we talking about? Which particular issue are we talking about? There is no simple grand solutions to anyone.
Yeah.
If you want to do these things well, we also have to do a lot of research.
Yeah.
And look at what the evidence is from other people trying things out.
There is an etiquette of the offline, which we already know. You've mentioned it. So we speak, we write stuff, we thank, and then there's the etiquette of or the norms or the rules of behavior in online. There seems to be some kind of digital obligation coming up. So people just feel the need of being there, of being present, from the fear of not missing, but also from there's some sort of obliged to reply. So if you don't reply, it's impolite.
Yes.
So there's almost like there are 2 kind of rules in these 2 worlds. Should we worry? Should we ignore, or should we adapt? Are these 2 etiquettes going to live together?
I think that the important thing is to use the lessons we have already learned from having to deal with these issues. We've always had these same issues in the non-digital world. Somebody invites you to this, do you invite them back? Somebody's child has achieved this, does every single person have to contact you to congratulate them? So this is extended by the digital world. Somebody on WhatsApp says, my child has achieved this, does everybody simply have to respond? And that becomes a burden. So you're absolutely right. New worlds need new etiquettes. But the actual process, the fact that it needs etiquette, that is not new. That has always been the case. And people don't notice, but there are subtle things going on online that help you. So, for example, take something, people say, what are all these memes that are traveling around? What is happening? Actually, one of the things we say about them in our research is these are the internet police. Because actually, if you look at them, they are usually things that are saying, they're usually being funny about something that we regard as maybe inappropriate. They are funny about the authorities. They are funny about what men are doing, or what women are doing, or what young people are doing, or what politicians are doing, or whatever. And actually, if you look, they are really saying, I am telling you what my values are. Do you agree with my values? Do you think that a man who behaves like that is a bad man? But I'm not doing it explicitly. I'm making a joke about those kind of men, right? And so in a way, they are, because what we're trying to do is often we want to know what other people think, not just how we think about people's behavior. And actually, this is quite an effective way of circulating these values and showing people that actually, a person who's not particularly articulate or literate, etc., may not want to write a whole thing about what they think about the way a particular group of men are behaving. But sharing a meme that makes a joke about them is very easy. And you don't have to produce it yourself. You just saw it somewhere, liked it, and sent it on. So that's what I mean by it's policing. It's creating all sorts of etiquettes around values in a very effective way online. Effective because nobody even knows that this is what is happening.
Oh, you should. I mean, the world should listen to you. All the world should listen to you because you are putting a perspective. I'm sure in the academic world, that's something normal. But for people like myself, or normal people, our listeners, this is very refreshing and reassuring, because what you're telling us in the end is we've done it before. Yes, it's the most intimate, but we shouldn't really be so scared and so afraid about
that. No, and also we don't have a choice. It's not like we can avoid it. It's there. We are going to have to do these things. I mean, can I also say that one of the points is that because we think this is very important, and because we think it does have educational value, the material we produce, like the global smartphone, is free. It's available online. Anybody in Romania can download it for free and read it, because we try and do everything that comes out of our work for free, because we think it is educational. This is the point of our work.
Fantastic. Well, on this note, thank you so much. It was really a treat, and thank you so much once again for your efforts today in these particular circumstances. I'm really appreciating your time given to us, and thank you so much, Professor Miller.
Okay, that's a pleasure. Okay.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Vă mulțumim că ne-ați urmărit, sperăm că v-a fost de folos și vă invităm în comunitatea noastră a Societății Omului Sănătos.